Tim and Mihaly, thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to be here with you and a privilege to speak at such a wonderful conference in these historic times. And I have to say, I'm very happy to be here with many colleagues from HR because I hope and I believe this truly could become the decade of HR. I feel very strongly, and maybe you feel it as well, that in these days of anxiety, of big questions, of challenges and pressures, risk and opportunities, and momentous redefinitions, maybe like never before, organizations need guidance. And I believe HR has an opportunity to become that guide as a critical friend and partner, as a catalyst with a cool head and a burning heart. But I also feel that many of the topics that we're discussing at this Congress have been around for a long time. And it is really time to get going. We got our toes in the water, but now we really need to pull through. So I immediately said yes when Mihaly very kindly offered me to join you. And I hope that in the next 20 minutes or so, we can explore how together we could try to put a little dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs once suggested. So without further ado, let us dive into that wonderful world of continual transformation. And I would like to ponder with you about a conundrum that has really kept me personally awake during the last 10 years or so. How can we create organizations where work is truly meaningful and where we both enjoy our daily jobs and contribute to a sustainable future for a company, our sector, and society at large? And I do believe this is important. Whilst this so-called fourth industrial revolution is literally taking the world by its ears, organizations have collectively produced numerous outcomes that nobody really wanted. There's burnout and loneliness, inequality and hunger, and ecological collapse. And by some estimates, more than $7 trillion are wasted every single year globally due to employee disengagement. And if that wasn't enough, whilst mankind is facing a historic inflection point, 56% of global citizens believe capitalism does more harm than good. Hence, I do think this is a critical time to reflect, and I would like to share with you a few thoughts on three simple questions. Firstly, why are we really here? Secondly, how can we evolve our organizations to achieve our purpose? And finally, who do we, each of us individually, need to become in order to make it work? And interestingly, I very often encounter people who tell me very earnestly that they deeply desire to become more agile or teal without ever really asking themselves the question why. And that is not surprising, is it? We have created a seductively materialistic and individualistic narrative in our Western society, where often self-interested growth, productivity, and stock prices have become ends in themselves. In a pandemic of busyness, we've often succumbed to that hedonistic treadmill of money for money's sake. And people start to work ever longer hours to attain status, social acceptance, and wealth, just to find out that it does not truly make them happier. And in creating ever greater riches, arguably for far too few, we've often ignored ecologic externalities just to discover that our mother planet is at the brink of bankruptcy and the collapse of global climate will threaten the livelihoods of millions. So what do we really believe in? What do we really stand for? These questions are both existential and fundamental. We create organizations for a purpose, to achieve something together, which we individually could not possibly achieve. And I strongly believe that 50 years after Milton Friedman's famous essay on business, both personal and organizational success must transcend a quest for money and shareholder value. As Colin Meyer maintained at the World Economic Forum this year, feels like years ago, the true purpose of organizations is to solve the planet's problems profitably. It is not just about profit and endless growth, but also about an inclusive and sustainable future for all stakeholders, not just bigger, but better. And not as a question of marketing or charity, but as a matter of morality and justice. Exploitation and inequality are not economic laws, but inherent failures of our economic system. And I believe we must evolve societal and organizational success measures beyond GDP and profit before tax. And in a world where traditional communities of churches and neighborhoods have been eroded, where scientific management has often filled gaps of meanings with the gospel of growth, and where work has become so central in our lives, where some businesses are like small states, I also believe businesses have to step up. As Immanuel Kant, the great philosopher, warned us a century ago, human beings must always be treated as an end in themselves, never as means, never as cogs in a machine. And today, I believe we need human-centric organizations more than ever to provide a place of meaning and community where people can grow and flourish and attain a positive collective purpose together. And I believe many people today actually agree with such an ambition, but struggle to understand how to make it happen. And as a result, change is very slow. And whatever consultants might sometimes suggest, there are no simple answers. Like people, every organization is different. However, I do strongly believe that we cannot just continue as before. We live in an ever more complex world, facing ever faster changes, advances in technology and data, shortening half-life of knowledge, and ever greater global interdependencies. In these new 20s, I think we must let go of the illusion that work can be predicted or planned in detail. Hence, as BCG suggested last year, the companies that will win in the 2020s are those who can compete on learning. From a paradigm of scalable efficiency that has dominated our businesses since the Industrial Revolution, we need to transition to a new world of scalable learning and development, from competitive to adaptive advantage, and from closed systems to boundaryless ecosystems. The simple truth is that our world has become too complex to be controlled through bureaucracy. We cannot stand on a mountaintop and preach strategy down the hills to achieve successful execution. Those liberated organizations of the future must be able to create an environment where people can and want to make a difference in order to harness ideas from everywhere. Today, in order to thrive, we need to embrace uncertainty and maximize human flourishing at work rather than just driving efficiency and productivity. But how do we get there? In my experience, if we want to enable self-organization and organizational learning at scale and move towards Teal, we need to have the courage to redesign work, adapting the context for our teams at multiple levels in terms of structure and management processes and organizational practices. And above all, we need to consciously revise the distribution of information, knowledge, and power. Existing systems often distort or suppress information. And in the future, I believe we need to move on information not just upwards, but everywhere. As they say at VC, radical transparency should prevail. Everything is public unless it's harmful. So that strategy becomes a firm-wide conversation. And in terms of power, central authority simply does not lend itself to decentralized experimentation and learning. At ING, we were one of the first banks to roll out Agile at scale globally. And as I think we demonstrated, Agile can provide more flexibility within the pyramid, enabling self-organization and cross-functional flows of information and decision-making. But I've also seen many Agile implementations struggle because they never dealt with existing power or underlying ownership structures. And in terms of management processes, organizational learning requires both order and freedom. Bill Torbett speaks here of liberating structures like principles, roles, routines, rituals, and methodologies to enable and host generative dialogue involving as many people as possible. And learning entails mechanisms to manage creative tensions and conflict. Innovation is creative destruction. By its very nature, total consensus would overwhelm complex systems, and we need procedures to enable collaboration across diversity and attain not consensus, but consent. And finally, given we are at an HR Congress, I strongly believe we must adapt sometimes anachronistic HR and finance practices. Support functions must become agile, but not just by organizing in tribes and squads, but by adapting their support processes to enable learning at scale. And these would be my top 5 suggestions. 1, focus needs to move from individual high performers towards system and team psychodynamics. Many leadership teams are dysfunctional. 2, performance management must facilitate self-reflection, strength-based feed-forwards, and peer coaching. And Antoinette and Lara will talk about this more. Stop those ratings and rankings. They simply do not work. All research tells us that. Thirdly, leadership and promotions must be truly based on ethical values and relational skills, not just conformity or ability to control. And I'm sure Tom will emphasize this later. 4, I believe we should truly explore and put a lot more emphasis on skills-based roles, peer-to-peer learning, and skills-based compensation, not just old-style job mappings. And finally, may I humbly suggest this is eventually the moment to rename human resources, which in itself is a term of the past and not truly reflecting the value the HR teams can offer. And yes, of course, we do need to digitize, but above all, I think we must install the mindsets and mechanisms for agile co-creation to truly serve our employee experience and co-create transformation. And in finance, we need to evolve resource allocation and target setting beyond annual budgeting. Together, let us liberate our organizations so that over time they will become laboratories of ideas, integrating action and inquiry into everything we do, always sensing and exploring and experimenting whilst we're moving in teams and in peer communities of learning. But there is more. In my experience, adapting the context does not mean necessarily that people will accept ownership. So how can we truly unleash the creativity of our people? For decades, we've been trained to see humans as strictly rational consumers in economic markets. In our businesses, we have treated people like easily replaceable human capital or as exchangeable resources to be controlled. And as a result, more than 75% of employees feel disengaged. So going forward, I believe we truly must put people first. We must relearn to cherish their uniqueness and design our organizations to fulfill their basic human needs, their sense of orientation, belonging, autonomy, and self-esteem. True success is only when every human being at work has the ability to develop, use their creativity, and have impact, when agency becomes activism. And this won't be automatic. In a world where we are all required to wear many different masks, our public identity has become disengaged from our inner life. And it has become challenging just to be with ourselves and with each other, resulting in dualisms and tensions. Therefore, in deliberately developmental organizations, we must help individuals to recognize their own biases and needs, anxieties, attachment styles, defense and coping mechanisms, and to grow their ability to work with and care for others, and in order to co-generate that meaning and value in service of the community. Our inner game is our outer game, or as Fred Laloux once said, we can only go far into the we if we fully inhabit the I. And I think collectively, we must learn to revise and explicitly contract organizational culture. And for me, above all, that relates to understanding and influencing those deeper assumptions, values, and patterns below the proverbial iceberg that determine how we interact with and treat each other in our ecosystem and what we truly care for. Instead of optimizing organizations as deterministic machines, dividing information and power and specializing, I think we need to start acknowledging organizations as complex developmental systems, as living organisms with minds and hearts and souls, where deep emotional bonds of community and trust matter as much as outcomes, and where individuals and teams experience, learn, and develop together in service of that regenerative purpose, where influence and authority are different from rank and position, and where employees have freedom to experiment, where many, many more people become their own CEOs, from doing to being, and from fear to love. Yet more than in structures, methodologies, or tools, the difference lies in core principles. In humanocracies, the business of business is people. And this is where I believe most of organizations seem stuck. Why? I regret to say so, colleagues and friends, but I believe it is very often because of us. The maturity of an organization can never transcend the maturity and consciousness of its leadership. If greater consciousness doesn't operate, a system simply does not possess the stability to let go of the past and transition to a new model. If our definition of success is going up that ladder from VP to SVP to EVP, hierarchy prevails. If we dominate others to uphold our own ego, people around us won't flourish. If we seek to control an uncertain environment with ever more rigidity, self-organization will perish. And finally, if we try to shrink the complexity of the world to our own cognitive limits, we will fail. In a world of self-organization, there simply is no place anymore for patriarchal commanders-in-chief who rule by positional power and dominance. Agile leaders focus on the why, not the how. Decisions are always made at the lowest possible level, close to the customers. Rather than telling people what to do, leaders today need to become experts in building, sensing, caring for, and influencing organizational systems, in coaching individuals and teams, and in enabling that co-creation and emergence of shared purpose. In such a new world, we need chief communicators who earn the respect of their people by making personal sacrifices to serve the collective good, and chief connectors who can create a cultural force field of energy, placing their needles like acupuncturists to facilitate the energy flows in an organizational body, fostering psychological safety and trust, reinforcing transparency and embracing failure, role modeling gratitude, compassion, and kindness. And such a new transpersonal leadership paradigm is more than just EQ. It integrates intellectual, emotional, and spiritual intelligence. Servant leaders lead beyond the ego, as John Knights writes, allowing time for awareness and reflection rather than jumping into action, letting go to become vulnerable imperfectionists, and holding the space for others to attain self-mastery and meaning. For traditional leaders, if we're honest, who have risen the corporate chain by being in control, this is a truly difficult challenge. What brought us here won't bring us there. So of course, the big question is, how can we transcend? What is that breakthrough? And like I'm sure many of you, I've spent many years of my career trying to become that good leader. Yet nevertheless, for a long time, if I'm honest, being right was probably often more important than to accept uncertainty and to deeply listen and learn. And I still don't have all the answers. I always say when I was young, I had all the answers. Now that I'm older, I've got all the questions. But in my personal experience, progression requires vertical development, facing our own shadows and our emotions, letting go of restrictive mental models, hearing our soul knocking at the ego's door. In fact, responsible leaders, said Manfred Kitz de Vries, are not only born, but twice born through painful individuation, where every victory of the self feels a bit like a defeat for the ego, until we can compassionately see all those facets of an interconnected whole. And above all, I believe we need to really take time to reflect and tap into what really matters to us, feeling how everything is profoundly connected, loving ourselves and others for mutual growth, and serving all life beyond the confines of our own ego. And accessing that essence of who we are and what we stand for, I believe, allows us to truly let go of fears and the desire to control. And I can assure you, once you fully commit yourself to serve a greater purpose, magically, synchronously, the world around you changes too. And suddenly, leadership is not a tribe of special individuals with special traits and not even a role, but about letting go of authority and unleashing the unique potential that is in everyone. About people no longer being victims of circumstances, but thriving in the creation of new possibilities. About learning together how to shape a more responsible future. And ultimately, leadership is a distributed and regenerative capability, an ecocentric flow of energy, what we collectively are able to bring to life, not by top-down transformation or by big bang organizational restructuring, but evolutionary through networks of teams and continual co-creation everywhere. So concluding, I want to offer you a final reflection. It took myself many years to acknowledge that sustainable organizational transformation is only possible through concurrent individual transformation. We are the system. Yet that also means that we all have the power and, I believe, the responsibility to shape our relationships and organizations from who we are and how we show up. We can all spark the liberation of our organizations by gradually crafting those structures, processes, and cultures needed to attain an environment for both individual development and the evolution of that emergent collective purpose. And together, I strongly believe we can compose a unifying new narrative to overcome some of the limitations of that social materialism that we live today, where success is not only about money, but compassion, community, and character. And I do hope some of you are inspired to seize this historic moment to revise your bearings, The evolution of technology and data pose critical opportunities and daunting challenges. The current pandemic lays bare the frailty of our social contract, and the economic lockdowns shine a glaring light on existing inequalities and even create new ones. Today is a time when we have to occupy those front rows of our lives and make choices to ensure our organizations flourish, and at the same time, our economy serves our humanity. And as I said at the beginning, we have our toes in the water, but we need to start pulling through, not as controller, but as servants, not with a perfect plan, but starting somewhere and adapting and growing whilst we go. So finally, a big thank you to all those who have stimulated and influenced my journey to date, and to Mihaly and the whole Hexa team and partners for organizing this wonderful virtual summit. And of course, to all of you fellow participants, please do connect and let's continue the conversation. Let us together roll up our sleeves and jointly reimagine our organizations for positive impact. Let us spark a fifth revolution to recover better, recover stronger, and recover together. We are not leaders because we rule. We are leaders because we truly care. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? And with that, back to Mihaly for a final poll and some Q&A. Thank you very much and stay safe.